The Shah was our man.
The hope of control by the West of the Middle East fades in 1979 when the Shah is overthrown by anti-Western fundamentalist leader Ayatollah Khomeini. By then, Saddam Hussein becomes again a viable card in Washington's hand. He becomes the actual president of Iraq after 11 years of being its vice president, and then perpetrates a sweeping purge of his opponents and attacks Iran without provocation or apparent reason.
The Stockholm Peace Research Institute has found that 52 different countries supplied weapons to Iran or Iraq, and 29 countries supplied both sides. So the very same countries that were saying how horrible the war was were using that war to stimulate their arms industries, to test some of their new weapons designs.
We did have some very limited engagement with the government of Iraq, actually a lot less so than other governments. And both protagonists were under arms embargoes during that period, arms embargoes that the United States, for its part, did not violate.
The United States was perhaps the most hypocritical of the countries that supplied arms for the war, because its public position was, we're not going to arm Iran, we're not going to arm Iraq, when quietly, secretly, they were actually arming both sides of the conflict.
Saddam Hussein's ambition, however, is to develop Iraq's own non-conventional mass destruction weapons. An inquiry conducted by the US Congress in 1992 reveals the American contribution to this effort is quite significant as well, and fully monitored by the CIA and the US State Department, whose reports as early as the late 70s have been detailing the extent of Iraq's mass destruction weapon programs and its repetitive use of chemical weapons against Iranian troops and Kurdish opponents.
In 1988, we had no idea that Saddam Hussein would be using chemical weapons on his own people. If we had known all this in advance, well, we would have made our policy quite a bit different in 1988, I'm sure.
Voices start being heard within the US government asking about the wisdom of giving Iraq huge credits intended for purchasing US agricultural goods, but used instead to buy helicopters, armored trucks, unreasonable amounts of pesticides, germs, and advanced arms-making technologies. The US State Department and the White House under Presidents Reagan and then Bush systematically quell all the inquiry attempts from Congress and the Treasury Department. From massive arms purchases to the development of costly military research programs, Saddam Hussein has ruined formerly rich Iraq. By the end of his war against Iran in 1988, the country is in the red for $40 billion. It is precisely at this time, starting in 1988, when Iraq is most desperate to maximize its oil income, that yet another crisis begins unfolding.
OPEC keeps the price of oil stable by limiting how much oil each OPEC member country can produce. In 1989, after the end of the Iraq-Iran war, Kuwait suddenly exceeds its quotas by 20%, driving the price of oil down on the world market. As a result of Kuwait's production hike, Iraq lost almost a third of its oil income. And this was at a time when Iraq was desperate for money. So the Iraqis felt that Kuwait was stabbing them in the back.
Welcomed by the West, this move by Kuwait hurts both Iraq's economy and pride, as they remember that Kuwait used to be part of their country before it was carved off by the British in 1928. Over the following months, tension escalates to the point of Saddam Hussein publicly threatening Kuwait. Given that Kuwait remains one of the primary oil suppliers to the West, the official response of the US State Department to Saddam's saber-rattling is rather surprising.
There are no special defense or security commitments to Kuwait.
The Americans had given indirectly an encouragement to Saddam Hussein to invade Kuwait.
If the Middle East stability is indeed a desirable goal for all, why did the West fuel such a brutal dictator as Saddam Hussein with credits, weapons, and advanced technologies? And why would the US State Department repeatedly tell Saddam that it has no defense agreement with Kuwait?
You know, it should come as no surprise that at the end of one war, and to reduce the threat that we saw in this region from the consequences of that conflict, that we would seek to direct either party in a more productive way, including Iraq.
I do not say that what Iraq committed in invasion of Kuwait is something that is acceptable to any of the Arab countries. No, it is not. But the way and the attitude that preceded the crisis made everyone feel that there must have been other plans to entrap Iraq into this situation. It is a trap. Unfortunately, Iraq fell in it.
On August the 2nd, 1990, convinced the US government would not interfere, Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. While US officials publicly express shock and surprise, the Pentagon is ready for action, having rehearsed this very situation for several months prior to Iraq's attack on Kuwait.
We went ahead and did an exercise, what's called a command post exercise, which is what internal look was, to test our ability to deal with this particular scenario, and also to uncover any command and control problems that might exist, any doctrine problems that might exist between the Air Force and the Navy and the Army forces. And it just so happened that we were in the middle of conducting the internal look command post exercise at the same time that the crisis developed in the Gulf.
Prior to that, when I was doing my training, all the officers was telling us about the build-up, the thing with Iraqi possibly